Jesus had often gone to the Mount of Olives with his disciples. So he told them, "Sit here while I go and pray." And he took with him Peter, James, and John, and he told them, "Stay and watch while I pray." And he went a little farther. And there he knelt down and he began to be in great anguish. And he was sorrowful to the point of death. And he cried out to his Father, "Father, Father, if it is possible, could you remove this cup from me? But if not, Father, not my will, but thine be done." And at that moment, an angel appeared and strengthened him. And he began to pray in earnest, so much so that drops of blood from his sweat fell to the ground. And he came back and arose to go to his disciples. And he found them sleeping. And he said, "Could you not watch with me, Peter, for 1 hour? For the body is weak, but the spirit is willing. Pray so that you will not enter into temptation." And then he went a second time. And he cried out to his Father, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to pass, then not my will, but thine be done." And as he went back, they were asleep again. And it happened a third time. Until then, all of a sudden, Judas Iscariot was coming. And he had with him the chief priests and the Pharisees and soldiers. And they had lanterns and they had weapons. And they came and Judas walked up and he kissed Jesus and betrayed him with a kiss. And Jesus said, "Who are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he said, "I am he." And they drew back and fell to the ground. And then Peter drew his sword and he cut off the ear of the high priest's servant, Malchus. And Jesus said, "Peter, put your sword back. Did I not tell you that I could call my Father and he would send 12 legions of angels? But then how could the scriptures be fulfilled?" And then they arrested Jesus. And the disciples fled out of fear. And as they arrested him, they put chains on him. And they drug him. They drug him like a criminal. And they pulled his hair and they hit him. And this was the beginning of the night where he had to endure 4 trials. They first brought him before Annas and then Caiaphas, the high priest. And all the false accusations and the lies and the slander were hurled upon Jesus. But he was like a lamb, was led to slaughter. And he was silent before his judges. And so they could find nothing in him, but they trumped up many charges and they brought him bound before Pilate, the governor. And as Pilate interrogated him and mocked him, he could not find no charges worthy of death, but he did not want this man's blood on his hands. So he sent him to Herod. And Herod then began to mock Jesus, and he put an elegant robe on him, the king of the Jews, and sent him back to Pilate. And there Pilate again was trying to find some way to get him out of his power. But he thought there is a feast, and it is a custom to release a criminal. And so he said to the Jews, "Would you want me to release to you Jesus, King of the Jews?" And they yelled, "No, we want Barabbas, Barabbas." And they kept yelling, "Barabbas." And finally, Pilate said, "I will have him punished, and then you will decide." And so he took him out and he had him scourged. He put him on a pole with his hands bound and they whipped him pulled this whips with nails in them through his back and his skin. I could not bear to see this one treated like this. And after this was over, he was bleeding, and they took a crown of thorns and they wound it together and they put it on his head. And the soldiers put a purple robe around him. And then they put a staff in his hand and they mocked him. They knelt before him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." And then they took his staff and they were spitting on him, and they beat him on the head with the staff. The one who had only loved, who had done so many things. And at that moment, my heart was breaking, and Pilate brought him back, and he brought him out in front of all the people. And as Jesus stood there, he said, they all began to yell, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And the chief priests had inspired the people. And so Pilate could no longer resist their accusation. And he gave Jesus up to the will of the people. And then they took him and they took off the purple robe and they put his robe on. And they laid a cross upon his back. And they drug him again and made him carry that cross all the way. And as the people were following him, the soldiers were whipping him. And many of the women, and I was there the whole way, and the women were wailing and mourning. But Jesus said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but for you and your children." And as Jesus made his way through the streets of Jerusalem to a place called Golgotha, which is known as the skull, there they took my Lord, and they put his hands on a cross, and they nailed his hands and his feet to the cross. And as he was there were two criminals on either side of him. And Pilate erected a sign and fastened it to the cross saying, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." And then the soldiers, they began to tear his cloaks between themselves. And then the seamless tunic, they cast lots for. And then one of the soldiers, as he was mocking Jesus, all of the people were coming by, ridiculing him. Even the religious leaders and the soldiers were mocking him as well. And one of the criminals said, "If you are the Christ, save yourself and us." But the other criminal, he said, "Don't you fear God? We are worthy of our punishment. This man has done nothing wrong." "Jesus," he said, "remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to that man, "I tell you the truth, this day you will be with me in paradise."